What is victory? It's not freeing hostages. That's not victory. It's not obliterating the Hamas. Victory is when we reclaim our land.
Israel is stronger in declaring sovereignty and bringing the entire jihadist world that outnumbers us overwhelmingly to their knees.
What's happening now is that everything is lining up now for a spiritual showdown. There are spiritual forces that date back thousands of years, and we are now entering into the final showdown.
Welcome to the Israel Guys and the Land of Israel Network, where we believe that in a world of anti-Israel propaganda and Jew hatred, you should have a direct connection to the land and people of Israel. Happy to have you guys with us today. I'm here with Joshua Waller, Rabbi Ari Abramowitz, Rabbi Jeremy Gimpel. I'm Luke Hilton. Guys, subscribe if you have not done so yet. We'd love to hear from you in the comment section below. So happy to be bringing this podcast to you every single week. Also happy to have Ari back with us this week. The world kind of probably... I don't even say probably. The world is being duped by what's happening in Gaza right now. And because this is a major news story, but I want to bring out the reality of what's actually happening, okay? You're watching social media, you're thinking Gaza's surrendering because there's hundreds, if not thousands of Gazans in the streets right now. And there's even a video of them waving white flags. And there's one guy, I don't know if you've seen the video, we'll show it to you on the screen. He turns around, he's on somebody's shoulders, and you see a Star of David on his shirt, right? So the world's watching. They're seeing potentially thousands of Gazans, protesting, and they're yelling, "We don't want Hamas. We don't want our captors." Some of them, one protest, they actually said, "We don't want Al Jazeera either." So if anybody is watching Al Jazeera, there's your reason to stop. But most people are looking at this thinking Gaza's had enough. The peaceful Gazans have decided to rise up and overthrow their captors, right? And there are lots of people in Gaza that simply want to live in peace with Israel. Hopefully the war is going to be over soon. Big question in all of this, which probably most people in the Western media are not asking, is where the heck have all these people been the last 538 days? And where were they 1 month ago when Hamas was releasing hostages and staging horrendous ceremonies to hand them over? And you have men, women, children, babies at these ceremonies watching and celebrating. And in between the ceremonies, there's massive demonstrations in support of Hamas. So the whole narrative is flipped on its head. And I know people in the world tend to forget things very quickly, but this something's not making sense here. So obviously we know what's really going on, right? Every single hostage pretty much coming out of Gaza said there's no civilians inside Gaza. Many, like hundreds of the terrorists on October 7th were civilians, right? Not actually, but they weren't like Hamas members. They're actually civilians coming to Israel, capturing people. Many of the hostages were held in so-called civilians'
70%.
home. 70% were civilians. Right.
Quote unquote.
Civilians were dragging Israelis into Gaza. One situation where a hostage was dragged into Gaza, sold to Hamas for money, and taken down into a tunnel, right? And obviously, despite offers of rewards from Israel of, I think, like millions of dollars for information about the hostages, not one single person, not one single piece of information that we know of has come out of Gaza. Not one single person has stepped forward. So, headlines right now, the world's thinking, is Gaza surrendering? Are there people in Gaza want to live in peace with Israel? I don't think so.
I think it's also worth listening to these massive protests. What are they actually saying? Are any of them saying Hamas is evil? They're doing evil things. We're standing against them for actual ideological reasons that they are. That's not what they're saying. It's only practical, pragmatic. Look at what they have brought upon us. They're not killing the Jews right. They're not killing the Jews well. They're not implementing it right. It's like pragmatic, practical things that happen when they're suffering by the consequences of what Hamas is doing. But there's never any actual protest to the underlying butchering, torture, horrific massacre of October 7th. You don't hear that.
The world is being duped. These are being orchestrated by Hamas. Hamas would kill people for stealing flour and wheat off an aid truck. And now there's hundreds of people marching in the streets chanting, end of Hamas, and the Hamas are just sitting there quietly. They're the ones orchestrating all this because for the first time, Israel is starting to unleash its power onto them, backed by the American administration. And so they're just manipulating us exactly where we don't want to be manipulated. No, there's innocence there. They just want to live in peace. This is all a giant manipulation.
And there's an end here. What do they want to do? They want to take that edge off just enough to put that little doubt in the heart, because as Jews, we want to believe in the goodness of mankind.
Oh, yeah.
We want to believe that these people, that somewhere deep in there, there's a spark of light, and we can fan that flame and show them that we're cousins and we love each other and we can have peace and we can reap. No. That's not what it is. What they want to do is to put that down in our minds, so we send in more foot soldiers. So these holy, young, God-fearing, righteous, ideological, patriotic Jews are going to go into Gaza as foot soldiers just in hopes that we don't have to kill this innocent civilian. And then we start seeing name after name and face after face after face, and then the widows and then the orphans, and then that happens again.
Why do you think the protests are happening now? Meaning it's been over 500 days. No one has protested anything against the Hamas, and all of a sudden now, why do you think it's happening now?
Well, I curious to hear y'all's thoughts on this, but I read, I didn't put it in my notes, but I read that there's experts estimating that there's only 60 days worth of food, water, and fuel left in Gaza. I'm kind of wondering, I know the world thinks the Gazans have been starving. We know the truth that Israel was sending in like 3,500 calories a day for every person in Gaza. I'm wondering, Israel's cut that off now, right? Are they actually afraid that they're going to starve now, or afraid that they're going to run out of water?
Well, yeah, these innocent civilians, many of them have already been very hungry because Hamas is hoarding all of that stuff for themselves. Hamas has enough food, fuel, and water to last them years.
I don't know about that. I think what I read what Luke read, and they said they have about 60 days left. And so,
Gaza or Hamas?
Hamas.
Because if you understand the way Hamas operates, and you saw the overwhelming amount of food and fuel and water.
We went in Gaza.
We saw the trucks.
Saw the hundreds of pallets stacked up. We saw the trucks rolling in
Hamas
constantly.
is going to be okay. But the people of Gaza, that's another story.
Right. You know what I've always been baffled at is because we look at these guys as like a bunch of barbaric, tribal, uneducated people. But I'm telling you what, I think one of the biggest mistakes that the Western world has made in dealing with Gaza is they've underestimated how incredibly brilliant their tactics have been. How they look at a situation, how they twist things. I mean, it takes brilliance, how they twist and how they know how to speak to a Jew-hating world is really baffling to me. How brilliant their schemes are and how they develop their
Do you have something in mind in specific when you say that?
Well, just like right now, how they know to play their cards. Let's wave a white flag now. Let's play this game. And the world, they know it. The world will believe this little game they're playing. We're going to act like the people now don't believe in us.
Yeah.
We're going to get this feeling of the world like Hamas is bad. And we're going to play that card until we see it starting to switch. And then we're going to start going with that again. That's what I'm saying. Like who would shift this kind of way, playing the game of the international world like these guys do? And it's baffling to me.
Well, the Jew-hating part of the world is really interesting to note now, because there is no Western pro-Palestine group that's showing any empathy, any compassion for the protesters. I haven't seen any protests marching for the Gazans. It's like they actually support the Hamas in their mission to undermine Western civilization. And they want to destroy it at its core. It's never about the Gazans. It's all about destroying Israel and destroying everything that Israel represents.
Well, on a bigger,
go ahead.
No, well, on a bigger note, I was saying how these leftists around the world, not only are they knowing exactly the intel behind what these Gazans are doing, it's not just people waving white flags in the middle of Gaza. They've got this international ring of support. I just saw there was a lawsuit on one of these campuses where Columbia, where they actually knew. They started their chats. They opened an old group or something.
That was wild.
I was like, you got to be kidding. They
the
knew
resistance is coming before October 7th.
Before the attack. They knew that the attack was coming, and they opened up their war machine to come along with October 7th attack. Now that's come to light. Now I don't know what's going to happen with that. But the fact is, it's not a people. They're not getting their cues from a tribal. And I guess that's really what I'm saying is, it's not just this little tribal group of people that aren't really educated. There's not good education there. It's a tribal, barbaric group. Where are they getting their lead? It's from outside.
It's like sophisticated.
It's a
savages.
very sophisticated. Well, and it's not.
Well funded.
They're
too.
being used. They're the pawn in the hand of sophisticated people of the globe that are using them.
And they know it, and that's why the very people in Europe that are using them are still in the crosshairs of their global jihad.
Right.
They're just going to have their heads cut off last and not first, because they know that there's no real love for them. They understand that the Egyptian tanks were there to make sure that the Gazans don't leave, that nobody wants the Gazans to actually be able to leave in order to be able to use them as a pawn, because otherwise the conflict is over, and they need that conflict as a preface, as a smokescreen for their attack on Israel.
So I think, obviously we know the truth, right? What would have to actually happen to know that there, one, are maybe Gazans that want to live in peace, or two, that Gaza is actually surrendering, right? Well, they would literally have to put their words into action and overthrow Hamas, or deliver up the hostages. There's got to be, there are these people that know where some of the hostages are, like guaranteed. They've been held by civilians. And like, if even just a tip, like to Israel, is that happening? Don't think so.
I think that anyone that's protesting should enter in the pilot program that just sent 100 Gazans to Indonesia.
Oh, that's a good idea.
If they want to surrender, great. Here's a plane ticket to Indonesia. You can work in construction and get far, far away from this land. I think that's what they want. They don't like Hamas. Let's get them as far away from Hamas as possible and start emptying Gaza out. Because even more than sovereignty, getting the evil out of the land and allowing Jews to declare sovereignty and resettle is really all that matters.
Yeah, we were talking earlier about Palmyra. Hopefully we'll get to that story and touch on that. But if you remember, the whole world was in shock as ISIS, which is just another Iran, which is just another of the jihadist groups. They went into the ancient idols of Palmyra that the world treasures, these ancient artifacts, and they don't see them as ancient artifacts. They see them as idols, and they're just destroying all of these idols. And people are like, well, what are you doing? It's an ancient artifact. Not for them. It's not an ancient artifact for them. They're still living there. They're still living in that context. And that's why it's important to know about the Treaty of Hudaybiyah. Do you know about that?
No. What is that?
This is when the Muslims of Medina with the Quraysh of Mecca, they had a 10-year peace treaty. Do you know who the Quraysh are, by the way?
No.
Do you know why? Because they trusted a Muslim peace treaty. There was a 10-year peace treaty, and after 2 years, the Muslims saw that there was an opportunity to go in, and they surprise attacked them and wiped them out. That's what happens to people who believe in peace treaties.
Is that not what happened on October 7th?
That's what happens constantly all the time. They see a peace treaty as another tool to dupe what's the word? Vulnerable and
naive,
vulnerable Westerners that would believe in that.
What's happening now is that everything is lining up now for a spiritual showdown. The truth of this war is finally being revealed, and we're realizing that there are spiritual forces that date back thousands of years, and there are people that are still living in an idolatrous mindset of child sacrifice, and we are now entering into the final showdown. And now with Ambassador Mike Huckabee now being the new ambassador, he's framing the conversation in a way that it needs to be framed. Check out this clip.
And right now, Israel needs an ally. And frankly, let me add, the Jewish people need to know they have friends. There's a long line of enemies that the Jewish people experience across this globe, and sadly, on some of our own university campuses. It's going to be a privilege to be able to be one of those people, not Jewish, Christian in fact, but to say to our Jewish friends, you will never go through what you've gone through alone. We will stand not behind you, we will stand with you.
The reason why I love that is he's not talking about standing with the Israeli people. He's talking about standing with the Jewish people. There were people in the Israeli government and with the Israeli establishment that said the last thing we want to do is to turn this into a religious war.
Right.
And it's like, guys, wake up. This is a religious war against the Jewish people. And now there's an ambassador from America that's saying, listen, I recognize this is about the Jewish people, and there's a brother to the Jewish people. I am a Christian, and I'm saying, as the ambassador to America, I'm standing with the Jewish people.
And it gives me hope for America. And I also just want to call out and have, what is a Yehudi, a Jew, is lahodot, to thank, to have hakarat tov, and to recognize and show gratitude, that it's a comfort, right? Isaiah says, nachamu, nachamu ami. That is a directive to the nations of the world. My people will be, particularly in the end of days, stand alone. They will be at the cruel mercies of vicious jihadists who massacre and torture them as the rest of the world turns against them. It's a directive to the nations of the world. Comfort my people. And I can say, when I heard his words, it did something. I have a little bit of callus around my heart. Like my heart is like this, with the dukes up, waiting to be attacked again and again by the nations of the world. And it just was a comfort to me to hear his words, and that which comes from the heart goes into the heart. And so I think he is a blessed person. He will receive blessing for that. America will receive blessing for that, to actually stand and comfort Israel. I hope they do so in action. But even the words at a time like this really matter. So that's an important thing to recognize.
Well, I'll tell you, there's a shift that's happening now. And it seems as though every time Israel relinquishes land, shows weakness, anti-Semitism grows. But when Israel starts to win, and Israel starts to be victorious, and we start to be the legions of the God of Israel, the army of God in the world starts to shift. And the new prime minister of Slovenia just said this, quote, "You must win your war because unfinished evil always returns. You are fighting not only for Israel, but for all of Western civilization." And it's like there's a shift that's now happening in the world, with Ambassador Huckabee coming out and just framing this as a battle between good and evil. It's a spiritual war, and that's what people need to understand.
Are you thinking about coming to Israel? If you've been on the typical tour to Israel before, you probably had an amazing experience. You fell in love with the Holy Land, and now you want to come back. But I'm guessing you may be looking for something that goes beyond the tour bus experience, something that goes deeper. Here at Hayuvel and the Israel Guys, our mission is to bring Christian volunteers from around the world to serve the land and people of Israel. At the same time, we're committed to connecting you to the roots of your faith and your Bible by experiencing the places where it all began. Our programs plant trees and vineyards, they harvest grapes and olives, we prune vines, and many other volunteer agriculture projects that all allow you to get your hands dirty in the soil of Israel's biblical heartland. At the same time, we take you to places that most tour buses don't go. You'll get to stand where Abraham stood, pick up pottery from ancient Shiloh, travel the same road of the patriarchs where all of the characters from the Bible traveled. You'll get to meet the local pioneers of Israel and hear their miraculous stories of life in Israel's biblical heartland. Over the last 15 years, we brought more than 3,000 Christians from 30 countries from all over the world to volunteer in Israel. We make the entire experience easy, simple, seamless, from filling out your application online to picking you up at the airport when you arrive. To find out more and start your journey, you just need to visit our website at serveisrael.com. We'll also put the link in the description below. We have trips that are still open for registration this year, as well as a number of volunteer programs open for registration in 2026. Just visit serveisrael.com or click the link below.
Well, on that note, I'm thinking, how does it work then if we send, so they better be good Gazans if we're sending them to India to be workers. Indonesia for workers. But otherwise, my immediate thought when I heard about that was, I don't know if I got this from you, Ari, or not, but my immediate thought was, we're kicking the can down the road, and these people will form a coalition together with the entire world to come back and attack Israel. If we send these Gazans out all over the world, how do we not expect that Amalek kind of like mindset of attack to Israel? How do you not expect that to just globally, like you're just spreading that hatred? I don't think that hatred is going to go anywhere. Our Western minds might say, oh, this is going to be amazing. They're going to learn from these nations that are not filled with hate. But is that really what's going to happen? Or is it going to be the other way?
Indonesia is a Muslim country, but that doesn't matter.
But they're not
Jews can still travel to Indonesia, and they do, and it will just become less hospitable for Jews, for tourists to go there. I think it's a terrible idea for Indonesia to do. But I also never liked the idea. Jeremy and I have this fight all the time. I feel like our job as the nation of Israel is not to export darkness and just, they're off our hands.
Well, that's what I'm saying with the quote you just read. That's the hard part, is when you got the nations of the world being like, hey, we're going to help, but then are you just pushing this down the road?
Well, which is why we need to uproot from the very core the concept of jihad, right? The more that the jihad is growing and expanding around the world to 57 Muslim countries, and they're feeling like we are winning this global spiritual religious war, Israel needs to uproot that very idea from the heart of it by, number one, declaring sovereignty. The larger Israel grows, the more in their minds, in their eyes, in their hearts, that means that the jihad is not real, is not true, that Allah is not the ultimate God, because Israel is stronger in declaring sovereignty and bringing the entire jihadist world that outnumbers us overwhelmingly to their knees. And so we need to do that by expanding the land of Israel to our biblical borders. I don't want to go to London or Paris or France, and that just our very modest biblical borders of the land, and also thoroughly defeat them. I understand we have limitations to what we can talk about, so I won't go into what exactly that means, but there needs to understand that the jihad, one of their languages of defeat is humiliation, a very public, humiliating defeat, bringing them to their knees. Only then can we possibly, in a healthy way, show compassion. Once we have thoroughly defeated them and they raise the white flag in recognition that they have been defeated.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but like, hasn't the defense minister, it's been verified now that he is basically telling Hamas that Israel will start annexing parts of Gaza if they don't surrender soon, if the hostages are not released soon.
What took him so long?
Well,
and why is it based around the hostages?
And also stop saying things.
Do it.
Just do it. It's I'm gonna.
Right. I also want to recognize here that you have the physical aspects of this war and the spiritual aspects, and it seems like Israel's not really seeing the spiritual so much. That's what we're really talking about. Is like the Arabs. They've declared holy war from day one, and that's what they've been doing. I think back to your point, Ari, when Israel back in 1967 took the Temple Mount. From what I heard, and this could be incorrect, I've never verified it, but there was a lot of Muslims actually like, oh, maybe we were duped, and maybe this is not the right thing, because the Jews just took back something, and there was a lot of people like, whoa.
But they didn't take the Temple Mount. It's just important to historically tweak that.
Yeah.
We conquered the Temple Mount in some ways against our own will.
Right.
Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister at the time, took the keys to the Temple Mount and gave it to the Waqf, which is the Jordanian Muslim authority.
But at that moment is when Islam said, Allah is.
It's a moment what he did. Concession from Israel.
They thought they won, but they lost.
Right. And so it's easy for us to look back and to say, well, what should Moshe Dayan have done? He should have declared sovereignty over the Temple Mount, built the temple. We weren't there yet. There's a reason we had to go 40 years through the desert and not 3 weeks to the Holy Land. We could have done it geographically.
Well, I think you're in the same situation now,
It's part of the journey we're on right now. We're not in the same situation now. Yeah. We're 40 years down the line. I mean, we're meaning it like as far as the analogy to the desert is concerned. And we have a nation of lions wearing this is their patch of the temple and Messiah, and understanding that that's what this is really about. As much as it may shake liberal, leftist, Western Jewish sensibilities of the establishment, that we understand here what this is really about. And there is a Judean voice rising.
Well, I don't think that the analogy of the desert is the right analogy. Even when Joshua came into the land, there were a couple of 100 years where we were figuring it out inside the land. We had to battle Amalek. We had to establish sovereignty. We had to move from Shiloh to Jerusalem. We had to declare sovereignty.
Well, we needed 40 years just to get to that place of being ready to enter the land. It's not like we were done then. There's a journey of growth that is manifesting even still till today. We're still on the journey of consciousness and waking up. And they are an instrument in the hands of God for that.
Well, what it seems like is happening right now is that Israel is slowly dismantling the deep state, dismantling the machine that it was built upon. Meaning right now there are actual protests in Israel, Jewish protests in the middle of a war against the government because they see what's happening as Netanyahu is looking to fire the chief of staff of the Shabak, of the security, the general security, the guy responsible.
Like the FBI, right?
The FBI in Israel, exactly. Who was ultimately the one responsible, the guy that was like, the buck needs to stop somewhere. He was the head of the FBI in Israel on October 7th.
Like if anybody should have known that October 7th was coming, it would have been him.
If there's anyone that should resign in shame, it should be him. And now Netanyahu is firing him, and there are protests where he doesn't want to leave, and the people don't want him to leave. And there is some sort of dismantling that's happening from that machine.
Right. I'm sorry to interrupt. Yeah, no, to me, it is very much reminiscent of the battle that happened even in the initial conquest of Israel, where there was Menachem Begin and Ben-Gurion.
Yeah.
And Yitzhak Rabin, who was later killed at the hands of a Jew, was actually fired weapons at the Altalena, a ship filled with weapons that were being delivered to Menachem Begin and the Irgun, and it was a fight that was happening within the nation. And what did Menachem Begin say? He said, I will not have a civil war, milchemet achim. They can fight against us and even kill us. I will not fight back. And I always thought that that was a very noble decision, but it's always the God-fearing Torah Jews who say, I will not harm my fellow Jew, which is right now in Israel today, the far left is saying, we are going to go, blood is going to flow through the streets if you dismantle this deep state, because that's all we have. Because that's all we have left. There's like a real conflict happening in Israel.
Well, if you see it, there's something that's happening really all over the world now.
Right. I was about to say, it feels
Elon
like
Musk is dismantling the deep state in America. Donald Trump is shaking things up. Things in Turkey are in turmoil. Syria and Lebanon are in absolute shambles. Everything is now in this transitional period where it really feels like the egg is decaying and a chicken is about to be born. That's literally what the mystical writings of Judaism say, that we're about to see something new in the world. And with that, America is positioning itself powerfully here in the Middle East. And there is a buildup.
Yeah, speaking of that buildup, maybe we could call that the decay point, where you see these like, bombers and stealth jets.
B-2 bombers, being staged.
What's going on? I mean, really, like this is a pretty, we talked about it on the show before. We can't say every week World War III is about to break out, but literally, it's like that moment.
Soon enough, we're going to get it right.
Okay, so more and more people are reporting a large U.S. military buildup in this week in Diego Garcia, Indian Ocean, right? We looked it up on the map. If you look, it's funny, I pulled it up on the map and immediately you're like, well, there's Iran, there's Yemen, there's Syria. It's like, if they were preparing for to take care of some of these nations, especially Iran, who unveiled a massive new underground rocket launching site and military technology, they're obviously preparing for something, and obviously either stupid or just really, really stubborn, not realizing that the U.S. might be about to obliterate them in conjunction with Israel. But if this is all true about what the United States is staging right there in the Indian Ocean, seems like they're preparing to take some people out.
Right. I don't think that they're stupid. One thing you cannot call Iran is stupid. They've been playing chess since before America as a nation was in diapers. Okay, they know exactly what they're doing, and Turkey being in cahoots right now and building up this massive military base, Air Force base in Palmyra in Syria.
Which that's not even on mainstream news.
I think you need
right
to talk
now,
about
right?
that, because when you're talking about Turkey, you're talking about a nation that's part of NATO, which has serious implications for duping the United States, duping other Western democratic nations. Like that to me is more scary, because
Turkey has proven itself to be part of the jihad time and time again, from the flotilla. If you remember the whole, they have been they're funding the jihad in every single way possible. And now they're building this massive base, and they're in negotiations with the Trump administration to acquire F-35s, which is
just scary.
It would be an existential threat to Israel on our exact border that is akin to Iranian nuclear.
How far are we talking about from Israel's border is this Syrian base that Turkey's building up?
I don't know the exact distance between it's in Syria.
Right. It's
right. There are neighbors.
It's right there.
I don't know the exact distance, but
now Syria or Turkey has had presence there for a while, but you're saying that and Russia has as well.
When Assad fell,
not officially though, right?
Really? Well, I mean, it's kind of like known that there has been some presence there, right?
I say more behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, and it probably hasn't been to this scale, but you're saying this is massive scale. They haven't had fighter jets sitting in Syria.
Right. And so the Trump administration is supposedly in discussions with them about it. And there is something very transactional and financial and commercial and capitalist, and I'm not saying that in a negative way, about the Trump administration. And I could imagine them selling F-35s to Turkey. And that would lead to a war hopefully it should, because of the existential threat that F-35s in Palmyra at the hands of Turkey right on Israel's border would pose to the existence of the state of Israel. So we're looking at a lot of tectonic shifts that are happening in such rapid succession that it's hard to even know where to start.
Well, because in actuality, we're talking about, if Turkey's establishing a base in Syria, we're talking about a Turkish, Syrian, Russian, potentially Lebanese, Chinese like alliance here, which is incredibly scary for Israel.
Well, that
any
would
other
say
democratic nations in the area.
That would give you a
United
hint.
States.
That would give you a little bit of a hint why America is taking this so seriously, moving our largest, most sophisticated brass directly to the most strategic point in the whole region to deal with this.
I think that America actually has the courage to open their eyes and see the situation for what it is. Because I think that the past administration was so overwhelmed at the magnitude of the alliance that is forming and the threats that America and the West is facing, that they just wanted to like appease it, put their head in the sand, and talk about transgender politics, right? And I think that the Trump administration is actually stepping up and saying, this is what's happening now. We need to step up before it's too late, and it may already be too late.
Trump said that from day one. I mean, remember what the first things he was saying from the first days he entered office? He was saying, we've got a massive problem, and World War III is a lot closer than you guys think. I mean, that was the exact quote, something like that from back when he first took office.
Well, just now, Netanyahu had an interview with a journalist named Gadi Taub, and he said that Biden threatened Netanyahu saying, if you're even thinking of attacking Iran, I'm going to cut off your arms. And he cut off arms to Israel, not just big arms, little arms. Like Biden was really squeezing Israel in the middle of our war. And Trump is doing the exact opposite now. He's moving his stealth bombers in striking range of Iran. And that really seems like when you realize that we're at a war of good and evil, then you know that Iran is the head. And America's going to take out the head.
Right. It's almost like Biden was holding us back. We're in like a bar fight against these giants all around us, holding us back. And then the guy that's holding us back is being traded out. And we're like, hold me back, someone hold me back, because the Trump administration is saying, do it, go. And it's really exposing the I don't want to say cowardice of our leadership, but the fear in their hearts to actually step up and do what needs to be done. We finally have the green light by the West. We're always like, they're not letting us do it. And now they are. And what are we doing?
Well, I feel like in Gaza, there's something to the fact that in 60 days, the Gazans themselves are going to run out of food, electricity, fuel, water. That's coming to an end. And maybe Hamas has its own storages, but Israel right now, because I'm wondering, like, why isn't Israel just unleashing hell on Gaza? Like Trump said, like Netanyahu said, what's taking them so long? And I feel like Netanyahu is so cool, calm, and collected. He's like, we got time. We have 4 years of this administration right now, and we will slowly take apart Hamas and take apart Gaza. They've already started a pilot program removing Gazans from the land. And now the minister said we're going to start annexing parts of Gaza. It's just happening in pieces.
Well, is it also likely that the attention is going to move from Gaza? I don't know. It sounds far-fetched to say that now, but it could if the rest of this thing blows up and America is literally attacking on many other fronts. The Prime Minister of Israel, Benjamin Netanyahu, could be well aware of this, saying, let's not attack while every news organization known to man is demonizing us on every single play that we're trying to bring sovereignty to this place. And ultimately, the Prime Minister has that in the back of his mind, even though he's not saying that publicly. The nation of Israel certainly has that in their mind of saying this needs to be sovereign territory of the land of Israel. And if that could happen while not in the spotlight, would be so much easier and that serve the nation. Now, I've got 3 quotes here. One from President Trump on this big buildup, one from Iran, and one from Yemen. Now, this is from Newsweek. Fascinating quotes, because I think it kind of sums up what we're talking about here. From U.S. President Donald Trump, he says, tremendous damage has been inflicted upon the Houthi barbarians, and watch how it will get progressively worse. So he's already naming it. This is not slowing down. This attack is full-fledged. And he didn't say anything about Iran here, even though that it's pretty obvious that they're so connected. But this is his quote. Now, what I find fascinating is that the Iranians are not taking him serious. And I don't, like you said, I don't think they're idiots. But
they just got 12 years of Obama and Biden, so they got away with a lot, and they haven't quite realized that they're dealing with a very different person now.
Right, but this is the Iran's chief of staff of armed forces, Major General Mohammad Bagheri. He stated that the enemy will definitely fall behind in this balance of power. Have you seen the Iranian video? I think we're going through the tunnels, we're seeing their missiles, and then we're looking at an American buildup
B-2 bombers.
B-2 bombers. I'm like, balance of power.
The craziest airplane in the world.
They also
right?
understand, you say they don't understand who they're talking to, and maybe they do.
Yeah.
Maybe they understand that Trump is a guy that has a soft spot in his heart or a strategic, pragmatic spot in his heart for tough guys. He has a place in his heart for Erdogan, right? Erdogan from Turkey, because he's a tough guy, right? So if they continue,
that's why I like Kim Jong-un so well.
Maybe this is already part of their positioning on a negotiation level with Trump by being super strong against him even now to try to show that their hand is better than it really is. Maybe. And maybe not.
Yeah, maybe not.
It remains to be
just
seen.
in a real practical sense, I'm like, he obviously doesn't know the American military very well if he's saying that, what has America got? Look at what I got. Like, that's what it sounds like he's saying. But obviously, time will tell. Time will tell. It's obviously in God's hands, we've seen throughout the ages.
And probably by the time you're watching this, the news will have changed.
Yeah. Here's a quote from Yemen's youth or Houthi military spokesperson.
I think anything you see or hear from the Yemen, the Yemen country, you just have to laugh. It just cracks me up so much.
They're even more so than Iran. He says the United States is mobilizing its forces to protect terrorism in the Middle East and is draining billions of dollars from American taxpayers to fight against the people in order to protect terrorism. You're like, I didn't even know what he's talking about. Like,
okay, you said Iran's not stupid. I kind of feel like it would be a fair assessment to say that the Yemen is just kind of like, or the Houthis are just kind of dumb. I mean, it's just really hilarious.
Iran's like, here's a club. Go out. And he's like, okay. Like, that's the guy. This is all sort of a playground
At
fight.
the same
it's
time,
all a bar fight. The dynamics
every
are
day
very
they
similar.
do shoot a ballistic missile at Israel.
How in the world are they getting ballistic missiles out?
Granted, but
And a number of them have been dissolving in the air, meaning like just in the air. And by the way, people are like, that means they're stupid.
A couple days ago.
That's true. I don't think it's because they're stupid. I think that to me, it is very much a shelter of protection from the God of Israel for his people, Israel.
What about the one that hit Egypt? It landed in the Sinai. Like, whoops. It's like, does the Middle East trust these Houthis to be shooting ballistic missiles when they could accidentally, like, sorry, Egypt, you know?
But it's just important to understand that we are in a powder keg right now. That there is a
massive powder
keg. I remember I was at a wedding once and there were these bales of hay, like huge, massive bales of hay. Everyone's sitting on the bales of hay, smoking cigarettes. I'm like, do you understand? That's where we're at right now. We're at that wedding right now. And there's a bunch of guys from all over the world smoking cigarettes on this bale of hay. And I was just in the army talking to my friends and I'm like, I can't believe I'm actually saying this again, but I feel like we are on the cusp of redemption, meaning we're about to we're facing a massive cataclysmic global war, and there will be a redemption for Israel coming right now. And I couldn't believe it, but a lot of my fellow soldiers were like, I'm feeling it too. Right. I'm feeling it too. That this Passover, something about this Passover, I feel like I'm not allowed to say it, you know, but I really feel like that.
Aren't we all supposed to be saying that? Like, is that not the hope of mankind? That we keep that hope alive. You just pulled this thing out of your pocket just a minute ago.
I think you should show everybody that.
Like, that was unreal to me.
Yeah, and also tell us how long you've been carrying it. Yeah.
I've been carrying this for a few years now. It's
show
called
the camera,
Mashiach,
so they can see it.
The Mashiach Brachot card, meaning when Messiah comes, there's certain blessings that you're supposed to say, and you want to be ready with this. And I've been carrying this around with me for years, and I just took it out again and look at it's weared away, and I could say I've been hoping and praying and expecting for so long. I almost wish I could say that, but I don't. It's only the expectation.
Yeah.
Is only growing more and more and more. And I think that we are on the cusp of it right now. And the way I sort of see it playing out is that the odds against us are going to be so overwhelming. We painted the picture now that's already formulating against us from Turkey and Russia and Iran and so many of these other, the entire jihadist network around us turning against us. And I think Trump is a pragmatist, maybe like, Israel, you're on your own, and we'll be like, what are we going to do? We have no hope.
Is there any concern about that specifically? And I love this, by the way. Like, that's amazing. Is there any concern, though, with the NATO? If it goes to NATO, is America, is there hands tied on that? If Turkey gets in the middle of this?
I think NATO needs to invoke Article 5 in order for an actual war to be launched based on, because if a nation in NATO does an aggressive act and then there's a retaliation against them, does that mean NATO needs to act?
Can they not just kick them out as a member? I don't understand how that works, but
that I don't know, but I do know that they need to invoke Article 5 to actually do that. So I would think that if Turkey starts amassing this massive base in Palmyra in Syria against Israel, and Israel attacks, I would like to think that there's a good possibility that the NATO countries would not invoke Article 5 and go to war against Israel.
If the American administration can see things clearly enough and maybe like not sell them F-35s, that would be a really great starting place, right?
Well, if we looked back, we could said, well, why did they sell Egypt? I mean, like, there's a whole host of people who have, pretty sophisticated military equipment from America, including people all over the Middle East who have American equipment that are now fighting Israel, including some of the weapons that were in Gaza were first originated with an American gifts to some, tribe somewhere or another. We've seen this over and over and over again throughout the Middle East. So,
okay, just to kind of wrap up with Gaza here, and I'm curious to hear y'all's thoughts. Is this a change in policy? Because the IDF has been publishing widely their operations in Gaza in the last week or two, including a lot of videos, a lot of reports. Over the last week, there's a report, they have eliminated 150 Hamas operatives and members of other terrorist groups. The Israel Defense Forces have struck 420 targets using air, sea, and ground forces. 10 senior Hamas officials and mid-level commanders have been confirmed killed. With potentially several more, and they're actively in Gaza's Tel Sultan and Shabora areas of Rafah, as well as parts of northern Gaza, Netzarim corridor. It feels like they're obliterating Gaza. My question is how much longer is this going to take? Is Gaza almost done for? Is Hamas almost done for? Is victory near? I mean, we talked about 60 days maybe worth of food, water, and fuel. Maybe 60 days, and we'll be done. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I know from the fact of soldiers that I've spoken to recently is that the rate of soldiers getting disheartened about the situation is very high.
Well, that's also been in the news of reservists, refusing to go back.
I know young people that are in their mandatory service that are saying, coming back home and saying, Mom, I don't feel right about going back. I've lost so many friends. I mean, this personal story that I'm just telling from a friend of mine. He's telling his mother this, and his mother's telling that to us.
Well, and to clarify why, it's because they spent over a year in Gaza, and then all of a sudden they just pulled out short of victory, and now they're going back. And so soldiers like this are saying, how many more times is this going to happen? Right. Are we going to go in, almost finish them, and then pull out again?
Almost every one of them has lost a number of friends, close friends, people that fought side by side to these men. And now when they pull out, and then they've got to go fight the exact same battle again.
In the same place.
In the same place again.
And traumatize their wives and their children again. The fallout from this is beyond what people.
So that's where I'm kind of wondering is, okay, look like we're going to see something now, but the soldiers are saying, is this just another round of politics?
You said, is it a change of policy? I think the answer is, if we start sending in ground troops, then no, it's just the same thing again and again. And if we don't send in ground troops and we're actually obliterating them as we need to be, saying, we're doing this now, get out or you die, right? Then that maybe would be a shift in policy. But it looks like they're preparing to send in more ground troops, in which case it is just a continuation of the same, which you can understand why soldiers are demoralized. Wait, the war ended, and why are you sending us in now? Is it to prove something to Trump? Is it for some political machinations? What is this about?
The problem is that Israel doesn't have a policy. It doesn't have a policy. What is victory? The last time Israel won a war was in 1967. That's the last time we've won. Since then, there have been operations and operations. We sort of won, sort of lost, kind of painful. The Yom Kippur War, there was never a victory, because what is victory? It's not freeing hostages. That's not victory. It's not obliterating the Hamas. Victory is when we reclaim our land, like we did in 1967. We reclaimed Sinai. We reclaimed the Golan. We reclaimed Judea and Samaria. We brought biblical Israel back to the biblical people of Israel. That is victory. And until we do that in Gaza, then of course the soldiers are going to be disheartened.
And that's why we need biblical leadership, God-fearing Torah leadership, because otherwise the vision of our mission and our purpose is just not there. And it becomes, what does victory become? A return to the status quo. Have we bought another month? Have we bought another year of just being able to live life and survive? Then we're back. We won normal, because we still exist. Yeah. We're back to the status quo of 10 Jews dying a week, the terrorism, and that's just the victory in the minds of.
And I feel like that was victory since 1967 was status quo. That was like what the government's hope is that we could just keep it all calm, don't change anything, and that was victory for them. If we could just leave it,
keep it the way it
status
is.
quo has been like the law, of the what since 67 really. So what you're saying is very, very true on the Israeli politics side. That hopefully now, there's no different leadership, so. Or maybe there is, and maybe this big change that we're seeing now is going to lead to some different leadership within the deep state. Seems to be crumbling with leaders leaving.
Well, I'll tell you, it seems to me just from the words of the Bible that the change of leadership in the nations is what's actually going to affect Israel.
That's right.
Then they will say among the nations, look at what God has done with you. Mm-hmm. And then we say, look at what God has done with us. Mm-hmm. So the fact that now, for the first time, the U.S. ambassador to Israel was previously a Bible-believing pastor, teacher of the Bible, and he's now the one that's giving the message to Israel, frames things the way they need to be framed for us, not for America. Look at this clip that I just brought up.
I cannot imagine under any circumstances that any right-minded person would find it acceptable to support or to even acknowledge that there was justification in any way for the massacre of innocent civilians on October the 7th. If I'm confirmed, I will be absolutely clear to carry the president's policies. They have been clear that Hamas will have no future in Gaza. It can't. This was not simply a cold-blooded murder in which people came across the borders and shot innocent people. They massacred them. And they did it in the way that was most physically painful and in the way that was most personally humiliating. And worse, they videotaped themselves doing it because they were proud of it. And they published it with pride. And they announced repeatedly that they would do it again. Hamas is not a government. It's not a standing army. It is a terrorist organization, and they acted like it. And they must be treated as such.
And so putting those two clips together, where he said, we need to stand alongside the Jewish people. Also putting together the fact that Donald Trump said everything the Houthis do, we're holding Iran responsible. And we also know that Iran is the puppet master of Hamas. Everything is now being framed in a spiritual language that this is a war against the Jewish people in the chosen land. And that's the way we need to see this. And if Israel starts seeing itself as the chosen people in our chosen land, then we can start talking about real victory.
When do we see this confirmation happening? I know it keeps being pushed off, but
just talking about Huckabee, I wanted to say, I feel like he is a living representation of someone from the nation saying, look at what God has done for you. Yeah. I mean, he's the first non-Jewish ambassador in years, right? Or a couple decades or something like that. I think this is amazing. Like we know we played music with Governor Huckabee in the Goat Winery like 15 years ago. He has like a record of strong support for Israel, including sovereignty in Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. And I think it's just amazing.
Well, what makes him even more powerful is it's not politically, he's not licking his finger, putting his finger in there to see what does everybody else think about Israel right now. Let's do that. His support for Israel, from personal experience with him, is based on his faith, which makes it so much deeper. And it's exactly what you're saying. It comes from a biblical root that's deep in him that will not be shaken.
But I want to make it clear, when he said any right-minded person, he's right. Meaning people who look at Israel and what we're facing and what we've endured and the jihad and the vicious, evil, sick, twisted, perverse terrorism that we're facing and fall on the other side, there's a reason for that. It's not like, well, Huckabee's a religious man and, well, they're secular, so they say, no. They're just as religious. They're just coming from a very different, darker theological place. The Tucker Carlsons and the Candace Owens, they are coming from it's a deep-seated theological replacement theology in which the downfall and devastation of Israel confirms what their belief system is, which is that God rejected the nation of Israel. And so they're coming from just as religious a place as Pastor Huckabee is. The only difference is he's being forthright and honest about it. And they're just acting like, oh, it's because of the occupation and the this and the that and the nonsense, and they're not actually saying what it really is. Maybe it's because they're not consciously aware of it, but I think that to some degree they are, and they're just not coming forth at this whole thing, both sides. This is a spiritual war on every front. On every front. Some people are just more conscious and aware of it and honest about it, and others aren't.
But you see, when the Jewish leadership, like the deep state, like Ronen Bar, like the Attorney General, and they say, let's just not turn this into a religious war. And then you have the ambassador of America saying, this is about the Jewish people and we will stand against the forces that are against the Jewish people. It's not an Israeli thing. It's a Jewish thing. It forces us to realign ourselves with the truth. And when he says right-minded, King Solomon says, Rashit Chochmah Yirat Hashem. The beginning of wisdom is the fear of God. Once you take God away from society, once you take God away from family, then men become women and women become men, and then you've lost all right-mindedness. And so what's being brought back here is just simple common sense and morals and truth. People massacred Jews and broadcasted on the internet. That's evil. Who was the orchestrator of that? Iran. And that's what's happening now.
Right, and I think it's worth mentioning, I don't know if this is too much of a deep dive into the spiritual DNA of what we're challenged and faced with here in Israel, but when we left Egypt, in Exodus chapter 12, it says, and also a mixed multitude, an Erev Rav, went up with them, and flocks and herds and very much livestock. And this was a mixture of the Egyptians that came with Israel, and there's a belief today that this establishment, this deep state in Israel, it's also a religious belief. And I have some of them as cousins and family, and I see that it's a religious belief that their dedication and their commitment is to curry favor among the nations of the world, to be accepted by Europeans and by the cosmopolitan elite. You know, it says that there's a few qualities: promoting assimilation and discouraging Torah observance. That is a characteristic of the Erev Rav, of the mixed multitude. Redefining Judaism in a way that removes God and removes the commandments and removes moral commitments and says, Tikkun Olam, we're here to fix the world. They don't actually quote the rest of the verse, Tikkun Olam b'malchut Shaddai, to fix the world in the name of God. And they just say, fix the world, that's why we're for trans LGBT rights. We're trying to fix the world, as if that exact antithesis of biblical values is fixing the world. It's a distortion and a twisting, and so we're facing that challenge and that battle internally here in Israel.
Well, I'll tell you what's so beautiful about that is that in the prophecies of the final war of Gog and Magog, it says that there will be Jews that join Gog and Magog and attack Israel. And then as that's happening, there will be righteous among the nations that stand alongside Israel. And
Who says that?
That's what it says in Zechariah. That's what it says in Isaiah. That's just what's going to happen.
Right.
And so it's not a Jewish thing, and it's like a God thing.
Yeah.
So the people that stand with God will all unite, and the people that are against God will all unite.
Right.
And it's not about the Jews in Israel, the Jews outside. The Jews in Israel sometimes are our worst enemy. And so that's now falling apart as something new is being born. And that's really exciting to me.
So how do the international supporters come in? You're saying that, obviously
it's an encouragement
circles
for us, because we're sitting here as those from the nations. There's obviously hundreds of thousands of people watching and listening every week from the nations, and it's encouraging to know that
you guys
it's
have
our
always
decision.
Been. You guys have always been that. You guys have always been the tip of the spear in the manifestation of these righteous of the nations that are going to come and love Israel in a selfless way and bless Israel in a selfless way. That it's happening in huge masses now. I mean, huge relatively, it's still a remnant, but you guys have been leading.
Can I ask a question to the rabbis in regard? I think everyone that's out in the nations right now, they're hearing us talk every week, and the world is in a really volatile state. And they're not Jewish. They're like, Luke and I, and they're sitting in places all over the world, literally. The channel reaches, we're reaching people from every pocket across the globe. And these people that love Israel, they know the redemption process is in play. The Jewish people are coming back to their homeland. We're seeing the ancient ruins being restored. The land is coming back to life. The agricultural cycles are coming back. Like all this pictures, the pictures of the redemption that the prophets all spoke about is like literally happening in front of them. How do they position themselves? They're in some far out place in from Alaska to Australia somewhere to even remote places in Europe, all the way to South Africa.
Sydney, Australia is the most watched city on this channel.
Is that right?
At least that's the last
statistics I heard.
Yeah.
So I'm saying there's these people, but they're not represented well by their governments. Even their local pastors and communities don't always get Israel. Their neighbors don't understand Israel, but they're these people in the hundreds of thousands. And my question is to you guys, as rabbis, what do you see the nations? What is their position right now? As the world is going crazy, what would you say to them?
Well, I'll tell you, Ari and I, we host the Land of Israel Fellowship once a week, every Sunday, and people from all over the world come. And the step in the right direction is to become more biblical. They start taking what's called the Old Testament a little bit more seriously. They start becoming more Israel. They start becoming more biblical. They start living a little bit more like Judea and a little bit less like Rome. And they start actually uniting spiritually with the people of Israel. And so what does that mean? There's 10 commandments. In the 10 commandments, there's we should really honor the Sabbath. Let's just give a moment to that. The seventh day is a special day. It doesn't mean you have to not go here or yes, do this or yes, do that. But it's saying that there's something to honor. It was God's special day. He made it, blessed it, and he made it holy. It's like taking steps to align more with the destiny of Israel, because you are not where you are physically, you are where you are spiritually, you are where your heart is, you are where your desire is, what you want. And if you want to align your destiny with Israel, the way to do that is to adopt more and more biblical lifestyles.
Well, so I think there's definitely truth to that. Isaiah 56, that's to me one of the most powerful of the prophecies. And it says, as for the foreigners who are joined to God, joined, meaning there's a certain actual coming together. We always say that we feel like not friends, but family. Yeah. That's what I mean by that. Who are joined to God to render service and to love God's name, to be devoted servants. All who keep the Sabbath and do not profane it. All who hold fast to my covenant. I will bring them to my sacred mount, El Har Kadshi, and let them rejoice in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices shall be welcome on my altar, for my house should be called a house of prayer for all peoples. That is part of the general thing that Jeremy is talking about that we see manifesting right now among the nations of the world. We see that happening, little sparks. Mike Huckabee would be an example of someone who would be in that category without a question, but also it really depends where you are. How are the Jews where you are suffering? How can you do where you are? What do you see in your eyes needs to be done from wherever you're at to stand with Israel and the Jewish people? Yes, pray for Israel, but speak up for Israel. Stand with Israel. And really the question is less for us and it's more for you guys.
No, and I would say it's not only for them, but they are the facilitators. You need to come to Israel. And the best way to come to Israel is to come through Hayovel. The best way to come is to bless the farmers of Israel, to volunteer here, to give your hands, to give your feet, to give your time, to give your resources, to actually come and rebuild the land. And I don't know any organization better than Hayovel to do it. So don't just pray for Israel and love Israel. Actually come to Israel when you can.
Right, and not only rebuild the land, but also it's very much, I've seen that people started off, they come on some sort of generic tour to Israel and they go to the Garden of the this and all the different things, which I'm not saying are not a good thing to do. But then the next trip, they're like, there's something deeper that's not a thirst that's not being quenched. And what is it? It's really relationships. They want friendships. They want relationships. They want to start kindling a real brotherhood with Jews in the land of Israel and Judea. And that's a big part of what you guys are doing, is bringing together and really kindling these relationships.
There you go. You guys heard it. I think that's an encouragement for everybody out there watching, listening. We've always told people for years and years and years, you have to do something for Israel, do something for the Jewish people, right? And I think the biggest thing you can do is to come. And if you come during wartime, we've got 35 people coming on a trip next week. That's like bonus points, I think. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because tickets are, plane tickets are more expensive. You're obviously flying into a country that is at war. You're coming to Israel's biblical heartland, which a lot of people are absolutely terrified to come to, right? Although I just saw the statistics. There's more Israeli Jews killed by Israeli Arabs since October 7th than Palestinian Arabs, meaning
is that right?
Israel proper is actually potentially more dangerous than Judea and Samaria.
Well, there's just no difference between the jihad. That's what they're trying to teach us.
There's no difference between
not all, but like a lot of Israeli Arabs, Arabs from Judea and Samaria, right? Like you're saying,
they just have more access. But you should not be worried about coming to Israel.
No,
you should be worried about your departure date. Meaning that the prophet Zechariah says, "Oholei Yehuda yishvu levetach," that the tents of Judea will dwell in safety. That it seems like we're the epicenter of all the conflict, the most scary place in the world to be. In reality, when you get here and you're walking the mountains here, you feel it. You can feel that this is actually the safest place to be. It's the return ticket that would make me nervous.
You're exactly right. When people get here, it's like, oh, there's holiness to this land. And I want to just say, as we wrap up this show, Luke, is that for people out there that want to be a part of blessing and serving Israel, this is, as we spoke about, this is not only a physical war that's facing the entire globe right now. This is a spiritual war as well. And maybe Jeremy's remarks to those of the nations to connect more to the biblical, just get a biblical foundation. Maybe that's the best way somebody individually could be a part of bringing redemption to this world. And I wouldn't say maybe. It is.
Yeah.
Get rooted in biblical context.
Zionism, yeah.
Connect to Zion, the place of all redemption, where it will come forth from. And that is how we fight what's happening in Gaza. That's how we fight the anti-Semitism that's covering the globe, the Jew hating that's covering the globe, the opposite of redemption and all of that's attacking the Jewish people. This historic thing. We've got enough in our back mirrors now to look back and say, okay, that's what we don't do. And now it's aligned with the Jewish people, the redemption that's coming. And so for all those of the nations, recognize, don't just look at the media.
2 phases.
Look at the spiritual redemption that's happening and be a part of that.
I've got 2 phases for anybody watching. You ready? Phase 1. Join the Land of Israel Fellowship.
That's right.
At thelandofisrael.com. We'll put a link down below because that's something people can do from anywhere in the world. It's easy. It's simple. They join you guys on a private, virtual fellowship every single week to learn Bible from the Land of Israel and also supporting, the Land of Israel network in Judea. That's phase 1. Phase 2, sign up for one of our trips, serveisrael.com. We'll put that link down below as well. It doesn't matter. Wartime, peacetime, we run these trips and you're coming to the heartland of Israel. And every trip we go to the Our Goat Farms, right? So you get to meet Jeremy and Ari if you come on one of our trips too. So there you guys go. That's something you can do. Obviously, if you're in Texas this year, you got to come to the Israel Summit, June 9th through 11th. But guys, do something. And I think the biggest thing to realize is that the decision's probably going to get harder and harder because right now you can still kind of ride the fence and be pro-Israel. You can pray, you can give money, but it's going to get tougher. That decision's going to have more consequences as time goes on. And we're just here to encourage you to stand strong, continue standing with the Bible, God's people, God's land, God's kingdom. I think that's our encouragement for you today. Guys, as always, stop listening to the lies and propaganda and connect with the truth of what's happening here in the Land of Israel. We'll be back next week here at the Land of Israel Fellowship, or Land of Israel Network and the Israel Guys.